Tell us about how Weird Weekends became an idea. How did it develop? How was it made? How was it commissioned?
So I had I'd worked on a show called TV Nation, and it was a show hosted by Michael Moore. And I lived in New York at that time, and it was basically an American show, although it was co-funded by the BBC, and it went on BBC Two. And I was sort of the token British correspondent, and they would send me off and do stories in which, again, I was sort of out of my depth and a bit geeky, and I'd be meeting crazed Ku Klux Klan members or members of cults or far right kind of gun-toting lunatics. And although at the time I didn't really know that this was. I mean, I thought I was being sent as a kind of plausible correspondent. It's an odd thing, like when you work in TV, all these epithets that you've never been attached to you as far as you're aware, like geeky or shambling, beanpole, specky. You know, those words weren't part of my life, not really, growing up. And I remember when I first launched Weird Weekend, suddenly there's this barrage of characterizations, and you think, oh, wow, no one ever really told me that I was a sort of ludicrous, stick-like kind of lady man. And so... But evidently, that's what Michael Moore saw in me, I think, and that was why I think he hired me. And after 2 seasons of TV Nation, I realized, okay, there's something in this, and I was signed to a development deal by the BBC, and one of the ideas I came up with was in essence a sort of long form version of the segments I'd been doing, covering similar terrain, the far right, religious weirdness. And also some other terrain, like I did the porn industry, which was new to me in some respects. And I did, but to do it sort of at 50 minutes length and with more heart and more immersion and more emotional connection. Because I think what happened was I realized I can't just be poking fun for 50 minutes. It'll get really old and really tiresome. And so I remember sitting down with my series producers, David Mortimer, and saying, look, there has to be some emotional connection here for it to work. And that was how it basically came about.
And at that time, were you aware that what was the form that you were trying to make? Were you making documentaries? Were you making entertainment? How did you perceive what you were creating?
The short answer was we weren't really sure, but I do know that I was trying to do something different, something that, as far as I knew, hadn't really been tried before. And so, as I say, bits were a kind of version of what I'd been doing at TV Nation. Other influences, at the time there was a sort of a popular documentary genre that took in things like Clive James's postcards, which were hour-long travel shows. Clive Anderson used to do shows. There were others. I always felt they were somewhat staid, and what they didn't have was what I'd learned to do at TV Nation, which was this sort of sense of shooting handheld and going into a situation never quite knowing what was likely to happen. There was also another reference, was a show which I think no one here, well, very few people here will remember because you're too young, but it was called In at the Deep End, and it followed a couple of presenters as they attempted to do unlikely professions, like they'd learn how to be a stand-up comedian, and it would build to them sort of trying out in their job, and usually failing in a sort of comic fashion. And what I added, I suppose, was the idea of applying that to morally complicated stories that were in some way either slightly dangerous or with sort of some real moral questions, moral dubiousness about them.